I still remember the exact weird smell of that dorm room the first time I stepped inside it. A mix of cheap carpet cleaner, someone's leftover instant ramen, and the faint metallic tang of anxiety. My name's Sophie, and I just moved into my freshman dorm with the usual mixture of hope and a stomach full of nerves. The room was smaller than the brochure pictures made it seem. 2 cinder block walls, 2 desks that leaned toward each other like apologetic friends, and 2 beds with those institutional mattresses that make every noise into a threat. My roommate was already there when I walked in. He was slight and pale, with black hair that kept falling into his eyes, and he wore thick glasses that magnified the way he watched the world. He introduced himself with a voice I could barely place, soft, somehow clipped, like someone who rehearsed conversations and then forgot the ending. He said his name once, flatly. I'll call him Eli. Eli gave me a handshake that felt like someone pretending to be warm, limp, hurried, a greeting without roots. He didn't talk much. At dinner that first night, I tried a couple of easy questions, where he was from, what he was planning to study, and he returned them with monosyllables, or with a reflexive stare at his own hands. He wasn't mean. He simply unraveled social threads in a way that left me untethered. By midnight, he'd turned off his lamp and slipped under his covers like someone extinguishing a match. The rest of the floor sounded like dorm life, a laugh through the plaster, a friend calling someone down the hall, the tinny music of the television in the common room. I put my headphones in and watched videos until my eyes grew heavy. The first sign that something was off was small and stupid, the way my duffel felt lighter when I rummaged through it the next morning. At first I blamed myself. Maybe I'd taken something out and forgot. But the absence had weight. I asked Eli about it, caught him off guard. He snapped, oddly brusque for someone who usually hid behind silence. I backed off, angry at myself for the accusation, but unable to shake the little, hollow feeling. Over the next few days, the pattern crept in. My stuff nudged, a zipper slightly open, a toothbrush moved. I started telling myself it was the building settling, or that I was tired, paranoid after a semester's worth of warnings about theft. The rationalizations were comforting and thin. Then the storm came. It was late, the sky a flat basin of thunder, and the flashing lightning made the ceiling of our room into a strobe. The sound of rain on the window was like an anxious drum. That night I woke, often, half dreaming, when I noticed the flicker again. 3 bright, almost cinematic bursts, too regular to be random lightning. When I turned over, I saw Eli sitting upright in his bed for a heartbeat, shoulders tight, hands fumbling under his pillow. He curled in on himself like someone rewinding a scene, and, as soon as my eyes met him, he lay back down and pretended to sleep. The flashes kept coming, and I realized with a sick lurch that those bright, mechanical lights were not thunder at all. They were camera flashes. I felt my blood cold as a sink. For a second I toyed with confronting him, with saying something theatrical that would make him stop, but fear has its own language. Instead, I said nothing and listened. The room breathed around us. The radiator ticked. The storm roared, and the soft sound of Eli's phone sliding under his pillow sounded like a small, professional whisper. That night did what nights like that do. It sat heavy until morning, and when morning came I found my backpack open, the internal pocket rifled through, as if someone had been trying to find something specific. It stopped being about missing things and turned sharp and personal. Someone had been in my bed, within arm's reach, while I slept. For the next few days I moved like someone half asleep, watching my things as if they might sprout legs and walk away. I started carrying my backpack into the bathroom with me when I showered, leaving nothing unattended on the floor. Friends on the hall noticed I was quieter, and a couple asked if I wanted to go out more often so I wouldn't have to sleep in that room alone. I said yes to anything that got me out of there, even if it meant spending more money on late-night coffee or pretending I liked walks I didn't. That storm night replayed in my head in tight slices. The flash, the slip of a phone, the way Eli's shoulders tensed and then pretended to relax. I wanted to believe I'd imagined the whole thing, that the flashes were lightning, that my bag had been left lighter because I was careless. But the unease didn't wash away. I started staying up later on purpose, determined to catch whatever small theft or invasion had been happening. I would lie in my bed, eyes open, and make a calendar in my head of the times things went missing. I learned to tell the difference between real lightning and something else. Human-made flashes were precise, a tight, bright burst, always the same intensity. Nature had variety. This had a signature. One night when Eli was out, he'd said he was staying in, but later that week I saw him leave with a backpack and didn't see him return until the next afternoon. I finally gave in to curiosity and the nagging need to know. His laptop sat on his desk, the lid cracked, sleep mode engaged. I told myself I was crossing a line. I told myself I'd put it back the way I found it and never say a word if I found nothing. My hands shook as I flipped the lid and tapped the trackpad. The desktop bloomed with a million tiny icons and folders, a chaotic collage of things that made my skin prickle. I started clicking through folders like a person checking under couches, but I didn't have to dig long before I found a file labeled in a way that made my stomach drop. One folder held subfolders named by dates. Inside were images, hundreds of images, and my throat closed. There I was, in a dozen different positions, rolled onto my side, curled up with my arm over my face, the glow of my phone lighting my cheekbones, the crumple of the blanket. Each photo was taken from the angle of a nightstand, or from an almost impossible vantage point, as if the camera had been set up deliberately to catch me mid-sleep. There were close-ups of my hands, a shot of my duffel unzipped, a picture of my passport page. My stomach dropped to the floor. I clicked faster, scanning, and found time-stamped images that matched the storms, the nights I knew I'd been watched. My hands moved on autopilot. I recorded the screen with my phone, fingers fumbling, making sure there was proof. Then I deleted every photo I could find, wiping the trash bin, heart thudding like a drum. It felt obscene and necessary in the same breath erasing someone's invasion, taking back the proof, and removing the ugliness from my life. When the laptop screen went black in sleep mode, I closed it and slid the lid down like a trap door. The apartment still hummed with the ordinary noise of other people's lives, footsteps in distant halls, a laugh from the lobby. But in my chest the noise was a different animal, a tight, constricting panic. I didn't wait. I walked straight to the residence life office in the dorm building, my recorded video pressed in my hand like a talisman. The coordinator on duty was a woman in her 30s, who smelled faintly of peppermint gum and wore the kind of patience that only late-night dorm staff develop. I told her everything in a rush. The flashes at night, the missing items, the photos I'd found. She listened with a slow, careful tilt of her head. Without making me feel ridiculous, she ushered me to a small office and watched the video I'd recorded, face unreadable as the images played. When it was over, she sat back and fixed me with a look that made me feel small and also somehow steady. "You did the right thing coming to tell us," she said. "We'll move you to another room tonight. We'll also check his machine and take copies of anything we need. You won't have to see him again." It felt like a lifeline. I signed the paperwork, packed the essentials in a duffel, and shuffled back to the room with a hollow sense of farewell. Packing felt unreal. I kept thinking I was being dramatic. Still, relief was a warm, clumsy thing when it arrived. The next morning, I walked into a different room across campus with a new roommate who seemed plain and normal, and who asked me about classes and coffee like a human being. It was small and perfect. But before I left, the last night in the old room kept me awake. I lay there with the lights out, the new mattress giving a hollow thud whenever I turned over, and convinced myself that I'd finally managed to be brave. I told myself I would sleep, that the worst was gone. Then I heard it. The springs under Eli's bed creak as he shifted. A small exhale, soft, controlled right above me. It was a sound that meant he was standing, and not in a casual way. My whole body tensed, and I'd told myself not to move a muscle, didn't dare to breathe loud enough to give him a cue. For less than a minute, the silence stretched like taffy. The springs moved again, steps retreating, and then nothing. It was the most intimate violation I could imagine. Someone standing over me while I pretended to be asleep. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I simply let dawn come and moved out with everything I had. I filed the complaint with housing, handed over the video and a written statement, and left the campus 2 days later. The university took action. At least that's what they said when I asked. But I never stayed to watch what discipline fell on Eli. I think sometimes institutions handle these things by moving the people they worry about, not always by dealing with the root. For me, moving was enough. Getting away from the room, changing the locks in my mind was salvation. Sometimes at night I still check my bag twice. I still flinch at flashes that are too close to the window. But I also learned something important. Names matter less than action. I told someone. I collected proof. I left. Those things felt like small victories carved out of a very ugly experience. The weeks that followed should have been a relief, but the fear didn't loosen its grip as easily as I hoped. Even in my new dorm across campus, I found myself sleeping with my phone clutched in my hand, thumb resting on the screen, ready to light it up at the faintest sound. My new roommate Ryan was a completely normal guy, the kind of person who snored gently, laughed at dumb TV shows, and minded his own business. Still, I couldn't help watching him sometimes, searching for hidden signs, bracing myself for some new betrayal. Trauma makes you suspicious of even kindness. The university emailed me once about further proceedings with Eli, but the message was deliberately vague, full of institutional language about privacy protections and disciplinary review. I deleted it without opening the attached PDF. I didn't want the details, didn't want to know if he was expelled or quietly shifted into another room where someone else might have to live through what I had. I wanted the distance, the silence. But silence has a way of twisting into its own noise. Your brain fills in the blanks. Sometimes, late at night, I'd walk past my old dorm building, not intentionally, just because the path to the dining hall sometimes curved that way. Each time, I felt the weight in my stomach, a sour heaviness. Once, I thought I saw him through the glass doors, hunched over at a vending machine. I told myself it couldn't be him, that he'd been moved out, but the glimpse of pale skin and dark hair was enough to quicken my pace, to keep me awake for another night. The creepiest part wasn't the photos, though that memory is branded into me. It was that last night, the sound of him exhaling above my bed, the weight of his presence without touch. That was worse than anything tangible, because it was invisible, unprovable. If I hadn't stayed awake that night, I might never have known how close he came, and that thought still makes me shudder. How many times had he stood there before, while I was too deeply asleep to notice? Ryan eventually noticed the way I locked my drawers, zipped up my backpack, double-checked the window latches. One evening he asked if someone had robbed me before. I just said, yeah, something like that. He didn't push, and I was grateful. Saying it out loud meant reliving it. There's no clean end to stories like this. No moment where the world resets to normal and you trust people the way you used to. The truth is, Eli probably still has the originals of those pictures on his phone, maybe on a cloud backup. They exist somewhere, pixels of me in my most vulnerable state, stored in the possession of someone who saw me as a thing to be collected instead of a person. I can't erase that. I can only live past it. And yet, in a way, I learned something about myself, too. Fear doesn't make you weak. Sometimes fear teaches you to act, to speak, to run. And that's survival. My name is Mara, and at 23, I thought I was being practical when I took my dad's friend Kathy up on her offer. A cheap furnished room in a 2-bed apartment, just until I saved enough to move somewhere permanent. Kathy said the other tenant was an older woman she trusted. Quiet, keeps to herself. She promised, and I believed her. I moved my duffel and a cheap dresser into the spare room, stacked boxes under the window, and tried to make the place feel like mine. The rent was a steal. The mortgage on peace of mind I didn't know I was buying. The oddness started the second night. I was half watching a sitcom in the living room, the TV glow painting the walls acne orange, when the hallway opened like a mouth and a pale head appeared. The woman, small, a little stooped, hair gray and straggly, stared at me from the shadow as if she were trying to read the script of whatever show I had on. Her lips made tiny, muttered noises, an under-breath that might have been words if I were willing to lean into it. "Betty?" I said, trying to sound casual. She groaned and retreated. The sound she made wasn't a word so much as a friction. Throat on bone. I told Kathy. She shrugged. "She's had an off week," she said, as if that explained a person peering through the doorway like an exhibit. The little episodes multiplied. Soft moans in the corridor, the slow sound of her feet stopping just outside my door, a rustle like paper dragged across wood. They always happened after dark, which made them feel scripted, purposeful. Once, around midnight, I heard a knock at my bedroom door. Single, insistent, and accompanied by that same groan. It went on long enough for my throat to close with panic. The knob never turned. The door was unlocked, and whatever misfiring part of me that wanted company kept me from calling out. The knocking finished, footsteps shuffled away, and my heart didn't stop racing for hours. That first time I woke to the silhouette at my bed, I assumed, stupidly, maybe she'd come to sit with me, maybe to ask for food. Instead, in the dark, I felt a presence at the edge of my mattress. A weight of air, a quiet outline, and then heard the same wet, low groan in my ear. I flipped on the lamp. There she stood. Betty, a 60-something woman with her hair in a loose gray halo and a look that could have been confusion if only confusion wore a certain fierceness. In her right hand, steady, deliberate, she held a long kitchen knife. The blade caught the lamp's light and threw it back like a promise. I remember the exact angle of the metal, the way it split the light into a thin, ugly line. For a second, my brain tried to file it away as a mistake. People bring knives to bedrooms for ordinary reasons, cutting fruit, opening boxes. But the way she held it, arm relaxed, a predator's patience, made my bones remember something older and more elemental. My mouth was dry. My suitcase tumbled, forgotten, to the floor. The TV's laugh track from earlier seemed like a different life. I opened my mouth to make a sound and found it shredded into a whisper. Her groan deepened, almost pleased, and then she took a single step forward. The floorboards sighed under her weight, the house itself a witness. In my chest, a small, rational voice kept trying to explain. Betty is confused. She needs help. Get help. But when the lamplight washed across her face, I could also see something colder. An oldness that wasn't just age, and an intent that felt too patient to be accidental. I did the only thing I could think to do. I edged backwards, slow and quiet, until my back hit the wall opposite the bed. My phone was on the dresser, just out of reach. Each second stretched like taffy. The groaning stopped. The knife tilted. For a second, I thought she might just turn and walk away. Then she raised the blade the smallest fraction, as if measuring whether motion would startle me. My hands shook so hard my fingertips left crescents in the plaster. I whispered Kathy's name at last, hoarse and stupid. The sound startled Betty like a bell. She didn't lower the knife. Instead, as though obeying someone else I couldn't see, she turned and drifted back toward the hallway, the blade dangling at her side like a pendulum. I didn't move until the sound of her footsteps faded. When the apartment was quiet again, I slid off the bed and grabbed my phone with both hands, nails biting into the plastic, and dialed Kathy faster than I'd ever dialed anyone in my life. Kathy picked up on the third ring, groggy and annoyed. I didn't care. I hissed into the phone what I had just seen. Betty standing over me, knife in hand, groaning like she wasn't fully awake. My voice cracked so bad it hardly sounded like me. Kathy fell silent for a long moment before whispering that Betty had no history of violence, that maybe it was sleepwalking or some other excuse. I told her no. There was nothing sleepy about the way she stared at me. Kathy finally muttered that she'd come by in the morning, but by then I'd already decided I wasn't spending another minute in that apartment. I grabbed my bag, shoved in whatever I could, and crept to the door. The hallway was black, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. My own pulse was louder than everything else. I kept waiting to hear her groan again, to feel that blade catch the air near my back, but somehow I made it out. Outside, the street lamps threw weak yellow circles on the wet pavement. I walked until my legs ached, found a 24-hour diner, and sat in the booth under buzzing fluorescent lights until dawn. The normal clatter of coffee cups and the smell of bacon grease never felt so holy. Later that morning, Kathy called me again, swearing she'd confronted Betty. She said Betty didn't even remember leaving her room, didn't remember the knife. Whether that was true or a convenient lie, I'll never know. I didn't go back for the rest of my stuff. I had Kathy mail it to me. To this day, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I can still picture her gray hair tangled in the lamplight, the blade reflecting that single cruel strip of brightness. I don't know if Betty was sleepwalking, psychotic, or something worse, but I do know one thing. Sometimes sharing a roof with a stranger means gambling with your life.